Aaron Vale had heard laughter before, but there was a special kind that stayed under the skin. It was the kind that followed him out of rooms, echoed in empty hallways, and returned at night when the world went quiet. For years, his family laughed whenever he spoke about his dream of building a music and media studio in the center of the city. They laughed when he said stories and songs could heal people. They laughed when he said one day his name would mean something. To them, Aaron was the boy who always looked too far ahead, the one who carried notebooks full of lyrics instead of applying for the office jobs they pushed toward him. But even when their mockery burned, he held his dream close. He had one reason above all to keep going: Lisa Rowan. She was the only person who had ever listened as though his words mattered. If you are enjoying this emotional story already, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Your support means a lot and helps more powerful stories reach more hearts around the world. Aaron did not know it then, but the same dream everyone mocked would one day become the reason they whispered his name with regret. And at the center of that long, painful journey was love, the kind that made the heart brave, the kind that could also break it. He first met Lisa in a public library on a rainy evening. He had been sitting at the back, scribbling lyrics in a worn black notebook, when a soft voice spoke over his shoulder. "If you keep pressing the pen that hard, you'll tear the page before you finish the verse." He turned and saw a young woman holding 3 books against her chest, her hair slightly damp from the rain, her eyes bright with the kind of warmth he had never been used to. "Maybe the page deserves it," he said, embarrassed. She smiled. "Or maybe the page is trying to survive your feelings." That made him laugh, and from that moment, something shifted in him. Lisa worked part-time at the library while studying design. She loved color, old buildings, and hand-drawn posters. Aaron loved melodies, stories, and the feeling that sound could turn pain into something beautiful. They became friends first. Every Thursday, they sat by the tall window near the poetry shelf and talked about everything: music, childhood, fear, ambition, and the strange loneliness of being misunderstood by people who were supposed to know you best. Lisa told him, "Dreams are fragile when they are young. Don't let careless hands touch yours too often." He never forgot that sentence. At home, his dream was treated like a family joke. His father, Doran Vale, was a stern man who believed survival mattered more than passion. "Music does not feed a man," he would say at dinner, barely looking at Aaron. His mother, Mira, was quieter, but her silence often hurt more than anger. His older sister, Celine, was sharper than both of them. "You're almost 30, she told him one night. "You still act like a teenager chasing applause. Grow up." His younger brother, Jovan, only laughed and added, "Maybe when he becomes a famous star, he'll buy us all a mansion." The table erupted with mocking laughter. Aaron sat through it with clenched hands beneath the table. One evening, after another humiliating dinner, he found Lisa waiting outside the small cafe where he worked nights. She had brought him tea because she remembered he had a headache earlier. "You look tired," she said softly. Aaron leaned against the wall and tried to smile. "I think I'm getting good at pretending I don't care." Lisa looked straight at him. "Don't become so good at pretending that you forget what's true." He looked at her then with a seriousness that frightened him. "And what is true?" She stepped closer, rain misting around them. "That you are not foolish for wanting more. That your dream is not embarrassing. That I believe in you." He swallowed hard. "You always say the exact thing I need." She gave him a sad smile. "Maybe because I listen." Their love did not begin with a confession. It began with patience. It began with quiet walks after work, with shared bread from street stalls, with her reading his lyrics and correcting his grammar while teasing him about his terrible handwriting. It began with the comfort of not having to perform for someone. Aaron realized he loved her the day she stood in a dusty, abandoned storefront with him, looking at cracked walls and broken lights, and said, "This could become something beautiful." He had shown her the place because it was cheap and empty and impossible. She had looked at it as though it was already alive. "I want to call it Rowan and Vale Studios," Aaron said shyly. Lisa laughed. "You haven't even asked me whether I want my name attached to your madness. Do you?" She looked around the ruined room, then back at him. "Yes, I do." That night he kissed her for the first time beneath a broken sign outside the building. It was gentle, uncertain, and full of trembling hope. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "Now you really have to succeed. I've officially become part of the dream." He rested his forehead against hers and answered, "You were always part of it. But dreams cost money, and love does not protect people from pressure." Aaron worked extra shifts at the cafe and started recording local singers with borrowed equipment at night. Lisa designed logos, posters, and social media pages for small businesses to help cover costs. They were exhausted, but together they found joy in struggle. Yet the more serious the dream became, the crueler his family became. One Sunday, when Aaron announced he had signed a small lease for the studio space, Doran slammed his hand on the table. "You used your savings on that," he shouted. "On noise and fantasy?" Celine shook her head with disgust. "You are truly hopeless," Mira whispered. "Aaron, why can't you just choose a stable life?" He looked around at all of them, hurt rising in his throat. "Because it's my life." Jovan smirked. "And what about that girl? Is she encouraging this nonsense too?" Aaron's face hardened. "Don't talk about Lisa." Celine laughed. "So that's it. She fills your head with all this courage, and now you think love is enough to build a future." Doran's voice turned cold. "You will regret this. And when you fail, do not come back asking for rescue." Aaron stood from the table. "I never asked any of you to believe in me, but you could have at least respected me." "Respect is earned," Doran replied. Aaron looked at him for a long moment. "Then one day I'll earn it far away from this house." He left shaking with anger. Lisa met him at the studio shell that evening and found him sitting on the floor among paint cans and wires. "It happened again?" she asked. He nodded. "They think loving this dream makes me stupid. They think loving you makes me weak." Lisa sat beside him. "And what do you think?" He let out a bitter laugh. "I think they've spent so long being disappointed in me that they wouldn't know what to do if I actually succeeded." She touched his hand. "Then don't prove them wrong for revenge. Prove them wrong because your heart deserves peace." Months passed. The studio slowly took shape. Lisa painted the walls warm cream and charcoal. Aaron fixed sound panels with his own hands. Their first clients were tiny: spoken word artists, church choirs, birthday recordings, and one nervous teenager who wanted to record a love song for his girlfriend. Aaron treated each project like it mattered. Lisa told him, "That is why people will keep coming back. You make them feel seen." He answered, "I learned that from you." Then came the first major setback. A local investor named Merrick Sloan visited the studio after hearing about Aaron's work. He praised the space, praised Aaron's ear, praised Lisa's branding. "You two could go far," he said smoothly. "With proper capital, this can become a city landmark." Aaron, hungry for growth, listened carefully. Merrick offered a partnership deal. He spoke in polished words, the kind that made struggle sound temporary. Lisa, however, was uneasy. "Something about him feels wrong," she told Aaron after the meeting. Aaron rubbed his forehead. "Maybe I'm just tired of being suspicious of every opportunity." She held his gaze. "I'm not saying refuse him. I'm saying read everything twice." He promised her he would. But pressure was building from every side. Bills were late. Equipment repairs were expensive. The landlord threatened to raise rent after 6 months. Aaron began to carry worry like a second skin. One night, exhausted and desperate, he signed preliminary papers with Merrick without showing Lisa first. He told himself it was only a temporary step, only a chance to breathe. But when Lisa found out, the silence between them felt heavier than shouting. "You signed without me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Aaron looked miserable. "I was trying to save us." "Us," she repeated. "You made a decision for both of us." He moved toward her. "Lisa, please." "No," she said, stepping back, eyes full of pain. "Do you know what hurts? It's not even the paper. It's that after everything, after all the times I stood beside you, you still chose fear over trust." He stared at her, broken. "I thought if I waited, we'd lose everything." She folded her arms tightly, as though holding herself together. "And now I'm wondering if I ever truly had a place in this dream." "That's not true." "Then why did you shut me out?" He had no answer that could heal it. Days later, the truth surfaced. Marek's deal would have taken most of the ownership rights from Aaron within a year. Lisa discovered it through a clause buried in the paperwork. She rushed to the studio with the documents in hand. "You were about to lose everything," she said. Aaron read the lines, his face draining of color. "I didn't see this." Lisa's anger gave way to heartbreak. "That is exactly what scared me." He looked up, ashamed. "You saved me." Tears filled her eyes. "I wanted to build this with you, Aaron. Not stand outside the door, hoping you would remember I was there." He reached for her, but she stepped away, crying now. "I love you," he said hoarsely. She closed her eyes. "I love you too. That's why this hurts so much." For the first time since they met, love felt fragile. A week later, Lisa left the city without warning. Aaron learned from her Aunt Elda that Lisa had accepted a design apprenticeship in another town. She said she needed space. Elda explained gently. She said staying would keep reopening the wound. Aaron stood there like a man whose breath had been taken away. She didn't even say goodbye. Elda looked at him with sympathy. Sometimes goodbye is the hardest word to survive. After Lisa left, the studio felt haunted. Her sketches still hung on the walls. Her handwriting still marked storage boxes. Her favorite mug still sat near the small sink. Aaron worked more than ever, but the joy had gone missing. The family that once mocked him now watched from a distance as his business slowly began to gain attention. A local singer's song, recorded in his studio, went viral online. Then a podcast host featured the studio in an interview. Then a small brand signed a content contract. Money began to flow slowly but steadily. But success felt thin without the one person who had believed before success existed. One night, Celine called him. Her tone was unnaturally polite. "I saw your studio in an article," she said. "Looks like things are finally going well." Aaron sat in the dark office, staring at the city lights. "What do you want, Celine?" She hesitated. "Nothing. I just wanted to say maybe we judged you too harshly." Aaron gave a humorless laugh. "Maybe." She did not answer. He ended the call. The whispers had begun. In family gatherings, neighbors now asked about him with curiosity. His father's friends mentioned the articles. People who had once smirked now nodded with awkward respect. Yet none of that brought him peace. Every achievement reminded him of the one voice missing from the room. Late one evening, he found an old note from Lisa tucked inside his black notebook. It was written in her neat hand, "Build something honest. If the world ever doubts you, let your work speak kindly but loudly." Aaron read it again and again, then sat alone in the quiet studio until dawn. He had won the first battle against mockery. But the war inside his heart had only just begun. And far away, in another town, Lisa was learning how to live with the fact that loving someone deeply did not always mean being able to stay. The first year after Lisa left was the loneliest season of Aaron Vale's life. From the outside, everything looked as though it was finally turning in his favor. Rowan and Vale Studios kept growing, though the name now felt like a wound. He could have changed it, but he never did. Every letter on the sign reminded him of what had once been possible. The studio now hosted local artists, independent filmmakers, podcasts, and live acoustic sessions that gathered thousands of views online. People began to call him talented, visionary, disciplined. Those same people had once used softer words with sharper meanings. Naive, unrealistic, stubborn, unserious. Success had not changed their memory. It had only changed their tone. His family noticed it too. At a Sunday gathering he almost skipped. Celine greeted him at the door with a smile that felt borrowed. "Aaron, you look good," she said. "Business must be treating you well." He studied her face for a moment before stepping inside. The house felt the same curtains, same framed photos, same silence that hid judgment, but something underneath had shifted. Jovan, who once laughed the loudest, now asked careful questions about investment and brand partnerships. Mira brought him extra food and watched him with anxious pride, as though she was trying to rewrite old years with one generous plate. Even Doran's voice held less iron than before. During dinner, Doran cleared his throat. "I heard your studio is partnering with a regional media company." Aaron nodded once. "Yes, that is impressive," Doran said. The word sat strangely in the room. Celine smiled as if waiting for Aaron to thank him. Instead, Aaron said, "I remember when you called it noise and fantasy." Mira lowered her eyes. Jovan shifted uncomfortably. Doran's face tightened. "People can be wrong." Aaron looked at him calmly. "Yes, they can." The table went quiet. Later that night, Mira followed him to the gate. "Your father is not good with regret," she said softly. Aaron kept his eyes on the street. Regret still counts, even when spoken badly. She touched his arm. "You've changed." He gave a tired smile. "I had to." But despite the growing success, nights remained heavy. Aaron often stayed late after everyone left, replaying memories in the empty recording room. He remembered Lisa standing barefoot on a ladder while pinning up a fabric panel. He remembered how she would hum while sketching. He remembered the exact way she said his name when she was proud of him. Sometimes he imagined hearing her footsteps in the hall, only for silence to answer. He had dated no one since her. Not because he lacked opportunity, but because every connection felt like a conversation held through glass. Then, on a windy afternoon in early autumn, the past returned. Aron had traveled to the nearby city of Belmere to attend a media conference. He was reviewing notes near an exhibition hall when he heard a familiar laugh behind him. His body reacted before his mind did. He turned. Lisa Rowan stood across the room speaking to a group of designers, elegant and composed in a deep green dress, her hair pinned back, a conference badge hanging at her waist. She looked older somehow, not in years but in quiet strength. Her face had the same warmth, yet it was guarded now, as though life had taught it caution. For a moment Aron forgot how to breathe. She saw him a second later. Everything around them seemed to blur. The voices, the movement, the music in the hall. All of it faded until only the distance between them remained. Lisa excused herself from the group and walked toward him slowly. "Aron," she said. "Lisa." It was astonishing how one name could carry grief, love, and time all at once. "You look well," she said politely. "So do you." A pause. "I didn't know you'd be here," he added. "I'm presenting tomorrow. Brand identity in creative spaces." He almost smiled. "That sounds exactly like you." "And you?" "Panel on independent studio growth." She nodded. "That sounds exactly like you too." The carefulness between them hurt more than anger ever had. Once, conversation had flowed like light. Now every word seemed to step around broken glass. He finally asked, "Can we talk?" Lisa looked away for a moment, then back at him. "Not here." They met later at a quiet cafe across from the river. Rain tapped softly against the windows, as if the city itself remembered the library where they had first met. Lisa wrapped her hands around a cup of tea. Aron stared at his coffee without drinking it. "I wrote to you," he said. "I know. You never answered." She nodded. "I read every letter." "Then why?" Her eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. "Because reading them hurt. Because replying would have pulled me back before I had learned how to stand without you." He closed his eyes briefly. "I deserved that. This is not about punishment, Aron." "Then what is it about?" She took a slow breath. "It is about trust. I loved you with my whole heart. But when you made that decision without me, I realized love was not protecting us from fear. And I was tired of standing beside doors you might close when panic returned." He swallowed. "I was scared. I know. I thought I was saving what we built. And I thought we were building it together." The honesty between them settled heavily. After a while Aron said, "I kept the name." A faint change crossed her face. "I noticed. I couldn't change it." "Why?" He looked at her directly then, no defenses left. "Because even after you left, it was still ours in my heart." Lisa looked down, blinking back tears. "That doesn't make what happened disappear." "I know," he whispered. They spoke for 2 hours that evening. Not to repair everything, because some damage does not yield so quickly, but to finally place truth where silence had lived. She told him about the apprenticeship, the long months of rebuilding her confidence, the fear that she had confused devotion with self-erasure. He told her about the studio's growth, his sleepless nights, the guilt that followed every success. By the time they stood to leave, the rain had stopped. At the cafe door, Aron said, "May I see you again before the conference ends?" Lisa hesitated, then nodded. "One walk. That's all." But one walk became 3. They talked by the river after her presentation. They shared lunch between schedules. They visited a bookstore where she teased him for still buying notebooks he barely filled. He laughed for the first time in months with the ease of his old self. Yet beneath every warm moment lay the ache of uncertainty. They were not strangers. They were not lovers again. They were something suspended between memory and possibility. On the final evening, as lights shimmered over the river, Aron stopped beside the railing. "I still love you," he said quietly. Lisa did not look surprised. She only looked sad. "That's the problem." "No," he said. "The problem was that I loved you and still failed you. Those are not the same thing." She turned toward him, eyes shining. "Do you know how many nights I hated myself for still wanting you after all that pain?" Aron's voice broke. "Probably as many nights as I hated myself for being the reason." She laughed weakly through tears. "You still know how to say the worst thing in the gentlest voice." He stepped closer, careful not to touch her without invitation. "I'm not asking you to come back because I'm lonely. I'm asking because I have finally become the man I should have been then. Not perfect, but honest enough to say I was wrong and strong enough not to hide behind fear." Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. "You can be sincere and still be too late." The words struck deep because they were true. When she left Belmere the next morning, Aaron watched her go with a feeling that was both fuller and emptier than before. At least now the silence had shape. At least now he knew the love remained, even if time had changed its language. Back in the city, the whispers around his name grew louder. A magazine featured him in a special issue about young creative founders. A radio host called him one of the most exciting independent media entrepreneurs in the region. Invitations came from investors, cultural groups, and event organizers. Suddenly his family wanted pictures with him. Jovan even asked to learn the business. One evening he visited home and found Celine on the veranda waiting for him. "Can I ask you something honestly?" she said. He leaned against the railing. "Try." She looked uncomfortable. "Do you hate us?" Aaron considered the question. "No. Hate is too active. For a long time, I was just hurt." Celine nodded slowly. "We were cruel." "Yes. I used to think mocking you would force you into a safer life. And now," she let out a bitter little laugh, "now I think we mocked you because we were afraid you might actually do what we never had the courage to try." Aaron studied her face. It was the closest thing to truth he had heard from his family in years. Weeks later, fate tested him again. Lisa's mother, Elda Rowan, fell ill and required an expensive emergency procedure. The hospital costs rose beyond what their family could quickly manage. Aaron heard about it through an old mutual friend. He did not hesitate. He covered the cost anonymously through a legal transfer set up by his accountant. But nothing remains hidden for long in a small world. Lisa appeared at his studio 2 days later, pale with emotion, the payment documents in her hand. "Was this you?" she asked. Aaron, standing in the editing room, looked at the paper and sighed softly. "You shouldn't have been told." "Aaron." "Yes." Her lips trembled. "Why would you do this without even speaking to me?" He gave a sad smile. "Because your mother once fed me when I had no money. Because she treated me kindly when I didn't deserve kindness from anyone. Because I knew you'd refuse if I asked. And because some things matter more than pride." Lisa stared at him, eyes filling. "You can't keep doing things that make it hard for me to stay away." He stepped closer. "Then maybe staying away is not what your heart wants." She shook her head, tears slipping free now. "Don't make this easy with beautiful words." "I'm not trying to make it easy," he said. "I'm trying to make it true." For a long moment they stood there surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and old memories. Then Lisa whispered, "I am still afraid." "So am I. What if we try again and break each other worse?" Aaron answered with painful honesty. "Then at least this time we will break while telling the truth." Lisa let out an unsteady breath. "That is a terrible promise. It's the only honest one I have." Against all the warnings in her mind, she laughed through her tears. It was small, fragile, but real. Aaron lifted his hand slowly and touched her cheek only when she did not move away. She leaned into that touch for one devastating second before stepping back again. "Not yet," she whispered. He nodded. "Not yet." That night, after she left, Aaron stood alone in the studio and understood that love had returned to the doorway. But it still had not decided whether to enter. And somewhere beyond love, beyond success, beyond the whispering voices of those who once mocked him, another storm was gathering. One that would force every hidden regret into the open. By the time winter settled over the city, Aaron Vale's name had become difficult to ignore. His studio had expanded to 2 floors. His live performance series was licensed by a streaming platform. Young artists traveled from other states to record with him. The same neighbors who had once heard his family mock him now spoke about him with admiration disguised as familiarity, as if they had believed in him all along. It was not loud praise that reached Aaron's ears most often. It was whispering. Soft, embarrassed, regretful whispering. His father's colleagues whispered when Doran entered a room. His sister's friends whispered at weddings and events. His mother heard it in markets. His brother heard it at bars. The family that had laughed at his dream now lived under the shadow of what they had failed to recognize. But success has a strange cruelty. It can place everything you once wanted into your hands, while leaving the one thing you most ache for just beyond reach. Lisa was back in the city permanently now. Her mother had recovered. She had opened a small but respected design practice, and occasionally consulted for creative brands. She and Aaron saw each other often, sometimes for work, sometimes for long talks, sometimes for quiet drives through streets they once crossed as younger people with lighter hearts. Their love had not disappeared. It had matured into something slower, more careful, and perhaps more dangerous because it was now fully aware of what it could lose. One evening, they stood on the rooftop of the studio after reviewing a campaign proposal. The city lights stretched around them like scattered stars. "You've changed this place," Lisa said, looking over the renovated courtyard below. "We changed it," Aaron replied. She smiled faintly. "You still say that." "Because it's still true." The wind moved a loose strand of hair across her face. Aaron resisted the urge to brush it aside. Some tendernesses had to be earned again. After a quiet moment, Lisa asked, "Do you ever wish none of this had happened? The pain, I mean." He thought for a long time. "Yes. And no." She turned toward him. "I hate what I did," he said. "I hate losing you. I hate the years we can't get back. But the shame forced me to look at the parts of myself ambition had covered. Fear. Pride. Control. I might have become successful and still remained small inside. Losing you showed me that." Lisa's eyes softened. "That answer would have made me angry 2 years ago. And now? Now it just makes me sad for both of us." Before he could speak again, his phone rang. It was Mira. When he answered, he immediately heard panic in her voice. "Aaron, please come home. It's your father." He arrived to find Doran seated in the living room, pale and shaken, legal papers spread across the center table. Celine stood near the curtains, arms folded tightly. Jovan paced like a trapped man. Mira looked as though she had aged 10 years in one evening. "What happened?" Aaron asked. Doran could not meet his eyes. Celine answered instead. "Jovan borrowed money for a business deal." Aaron looked at his brother. "What kind of business deal?" Jovan ran a hand over his face. "Property speculation. It was supposed to turn fast. My partner disappeared. The debt is now tied to collateral." Aaron's stomach tightened. "What collateral?" Silence. Then Mira whispered, "The house." Aaron stared at them. Jovan spoke quickly, desperately. "I thought I could fix it before anyone knew. I only needed more time." "How much?" Aaron asked coldly. Celine named the amount. It was enormous. Aaron turned to Doran. "You knew." Doran's jaw worked before he finally said, "I signed because he said it was temporary." Aaron let out a humorless laugh, disbelief colliding with old pain. "So the man who called my dream fantasy signed the family house into a reckless gamble?" No one answered. Jovan stepped forward. "Aaron, please. I know I've been foolish. But if this goes through, we lose everything." The irony was almost unbearable. Aaron looked around the room that had once swallowed his humiliation so casually. Now desperation lived in every corner. Doran finally raised his eyes. "I am asking for your help." There it was, the sentence Aaron had imagined 100 times and never enjoyed in reality. He said nothing. Mira began to cry quietly. "Please, Aaron." He walked to the window and looked out into the dark street. In the glass he could see the reflection of his family behind him, all of them waiting, all of them afraid. For years he had wanted them to feel even a fraction of what they made him feel. Small, dismissed, powerless. Now that moment had arrived, but vengeance felt emptier than he had imagined. Without turning, he asked, "If this were me standing here years ago, after making a mistake with my dream, what would you have said?" Silence again. Then Doran, voice heavy with shame, answered, "I would have called you irresponsible." Aaron nodded. "Yes, you would have." He turned back to them. "And what would you have done?" No one spoke. "You would have let me drown," he said quietly, "because you believed failure was a lesson best learned through suffering." Mira whispered, "We were wrong." Aaron looked at her. Then at Celine. Then at Doran. Finally at Jovan, whose face had crumbled under fear. "Yes," Aaron said. "You were." He left without promising anything. That night he drove aimlessly until he found himself outside Lisa's office. The lights were still on. She opened the door before he knocked, saw his face, and asked no questions at first. She simply led him inside and handed him tea the way she used to. He sat heavily, papers spread before him. After reading them, she leaned back slowly. "This is serious." "I know. What do you want to do?" He laughed bitterly. "That is the problem. Part of me wants to walk away and let consequence teach them everything empathy never did. And the other part? The other part still loves them. Or maybe loves the idea of who I wanted them to be." Lisa studied him for a moment. "Helping them does not erase what they did." "I know. Refusing to help does not make you cruel either." He looked at her, exhausted. "Then why does every option feel like grief?" She sat across from him and spoke gently. "Because heartbreak is not only romantic, Aaron. Sometimes it is family finally becoming honest too late." The sentence landed deeply. Over the next 3 days, Aaron worked with lawyers and financial advisors. He discovered the debt could be settled through a combination of repayment, asset restructuring, and a legal challenge against Jovan's fraudulent partner. But only if action was taken immediately. He could save the house. He could prevent public collapse. He could pull them back from ruin. At the emergency meeting with the lawyers present, Doran seemed smaller than Aaron had ever seen him. Celine kept dabbing her eyes. Jovan could barely sit still. Aaron placed the documents on the table. "I can stop this," he said. "But there will be conditions." Jovan nodded eagerly. "Anything. You do not touch another business opportunity without legal review." "Yes." "Celine, you will stop managing appearances and start managing truth. No more pretending our family is something it is not." She lowered her head. "All right, Mama," he said more softly to Mira. "You stop protecting everyone from the truth until the truth grows claws." Tears ran down her face. "I will." Then he looked at Doran. The room seemed to narrow. "And you," Aaron said, "will say what should have been said years ago. Not because it changes the past. Because I will not keep rescuing people who only know how to demand." Doran's lips trembled faintly. For a proud man, apology was harder than punishment. But perhaps regret had finally worn him down enough to make honesty possible. He stood. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I mocked your dream because I did not understand it. I insulted your ambition because I was afraid of what I could not control. I spoke to you as though failure would make you stronger, when in truth I was only making you lonelier. I was wrong about your work. I was wrong about your character. And I was wrong about the kind of man you would become." Mira wept openly. Celine turned away. Jovan covered his face. Doran continued, barely holding himself together. "You did not earn my respect today, Aaron. You earned it years ago. I was simply too proud to admit it." For a long second, Aaron could not respond. Those were the words he had wanted for so long, yet hearing them now felt less like triumph and more like mourning. For the years lost, for the tenderness never given, for the younger version of himself who had needed this and gone without it. He finally said, "Thank you." That was all. He saved the house. The legal process took weeks, but the immediate danger passed. Words still leaked, as such things always do. And so the whispers grew sharper, but now they cut in a different direction. People did not only whisper that Aaron had succeeded. They whispered that when his family failed, it was the dreamer they mocked who saved them. Regret traveled faster than pride ever had. Yet even that did not complete the story in his heart. A few nights after the case stabilized, Aaron invited Lisa to the studio rooftop again. The air was cold. The city below hummed softly. He had no speech prepared, only truth. "I spent years wanting everyone to see my worth," he began. "Family, neighbors, the city. But the only eyes I truly wanted to be able to face were yours." Lisa stood still, watching him. "I loved you when I was hungry and uncertain. I loved you when the dream was all I had. I loved you when you left, though I understood why you had to. And I love you now, with more humility than before, with more honesty, with more room for your voice beside mine." Her eyes filled with tears. "I cannot promise we will never hurt each other again," he said. "Life is too real for that. But I can promise I will never again build a future by shutting you outside of it. If you choose me, it will be as partner, witness, challenge, and home. Not as decoration around my ambition. Not as someone expected to stay silent when I am afraid." Lisa's tears spilled freely now. "Do you know how long I waited to hear you speak like this?" He gave a weak smile. "Too long." "Yes," she whispered. "Too long." He took a step closer. "And now?" For a moment she said nothing. Then she laughed softly through tears, the saddest and sweetest sound he knew. "Now I think my heart is tired of pretending it moved on." When she finally stepped into his arms, it did not feel like a dramatic ending. It felt like a wound choosing carefully to close. He held her as if he understood both the privilege and the fragility of being allowed to again. She pressed her face against his chest and cried for all the lost time, all the unsent letters, all the fear, all the love that had survived anyway. "I still love you," she murmured. "I never stopped," he answered. This time, when he kissed her, there was no hurried innocence, no desperate confusion. There was memory, apology, longing, grief, and hope all folded together. It was tender and aching and real. Months later, at the official relaunch event for the studio's new creative foundation, Aaron stood before a crowd of artists, friends, journalists, and community leaders. Beside him was Lisa, now not only restored to his heart, but formally restored to the work as creative director. Her name remained on the building because it belonged there. In the front row sat Mira, Celine, Jovan, and Doran, quieter people than they had once been. Aaron took the microphone and looked over the crowd. "There was a time," he said, "when this dream was treated like a joke. There was a time when I almost lost love because I was too afraid to trust the very person standing beside me. There was a time when I thought success would erase heartbreak. It didn't. It only taught me that achievement means little if you do not become a better human while chasing it." The audience was silent. "So tonight is not only about growth," he continued. "It is about gratitude, repair, and the courage to keep building after being misunderstood." He turned toward Lisa, and the room seemed to soften around them. "She believed in this before there was proof," he said. "And when I failed her, she still taught me the kind of man I needed to become." Lisa's eyes shimmered. In the front row, Doran lowered his head. The applause that followed was warm and long. But what remained with Aaron most was not the sound of celebration. It was the sight of the people who had once mocked his dream now sitting in humbled silence, whispering his name not with laughter, but with regret. And if this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Sometimes the dream they laugh at is the same dream that will one day save lives, heal love, and make those who doubted whisper your name long after the room grows quiet.